Hello, my name is Marty Nelson, and this is my final project for ETD 6040, Visual Literacy. For my revision, I decided to revise a unit on World War II for one of my world history classes. I currently teach this class to only one section of freshmen, and I actually didn't teach the class last year, so these are revisions made from a unit PowerPoint in 2011. Before I get into the presentation, I just want to quickly read a quote from Annie Bamford, 2003. And it states, "Images play a role in understanding the world. The information age has led to the need to process volumes of data quickly and efficiently, and the adage of a, quote, picture being worth 1,000 words is revealed in the way images are utilized in interactive media." This unit was redesigned with kind of that in mind, the idea that our students are constantly surrounded by images and the need for visual literacy is as important as ever. So here is the dynamic instructional design model from Lever Duffy and McDonald. And the first step is to know the learners. As I mentioned, my class is freshmen. We are culturally and academically diverse. Many of my students have concrete cognitive skills. A lot of it is black and white. They struggle with the abstract. But we've come a long way this year, and this World War II unit, which is always towards the end of the year, has a lot of primary sources in it, and the students are going to have to analyze more than they had in previous units. Because of this, I've decided to incorporate a lot more visuals into this unit because the rigor is simply upped in terms of the level of reading. Number 2, articulate objectives. This unit is based, the revisions, for this unit were really based on the formation of my essential questions. Something I've really been focusing on is using backwards design from Understanding by Design by McTighe and Wiggins to really look at what I want my kids to know by really looking at my assessment. The assessment is a multiple choice exam. One revision to the upcoming exam will be that the students will actually be answering the essential questions. They'll be chosen at random, but the students will have to short answer / free response style respond to questions that they will see throughout the unit. I also put a daily schedule in the Prezi for each day of the unit. Establish the learning environment. Available technology. I have an open U-shaped setup in the classroom, and our learning environment is really based on mutual respect. I cannot demand respect from my students if I do not first give that respect to them. Identifying and teaching learning strategies. This is where a lot of the revisions came in. I've incorporated a couple of videos really to elicit emotion. Emotions, this is a quote from Berlin and Kupchak. The emotional images can elicit emotions more rapidly, and that was something that I kind of took away from the Levin reading, was that emotional images can really force students to empathize and to put themselves in other people's shoes, and that's really something we want to focus on in history. I'm also combining primary source readings with primary source visuals. I'll explain that as we get into the actual unit Prezi. Using spatial technology, I've created a Google Earth tour for the war in the Pacific, and I'll give you a little bit of that as well. Persuasive images to understand public opinion. We're going to look at 8 posters created during World War II that were used by government and other private sector institutions to really persuade people to do the right thing, or to simply help the war effort. And there's also a couple web videos that I've put into the unit PowerPoint that I will quickly show to supplement the readings and supplement the material. Selected technologies, I am lucky enough to have the following in the classroom. Incredibly lucky. The projector, laptop, internet are used every single day throughout the unit. And lastly, evaluate and revise the design, and this is where the essential questions come into play. Before we get started at looking at the actual unit, I just kind of wanted to focus on Pavlov's theory of dual coding for a second, and just kind of, this is from my paper, and it says dual coding suggests that our brain takes in information through two separate channels for verbal and pictorial. By giving the students both verbal and visual information on the geography of the Pacific, I will have forced the two channels to communicate, therefore making it more likely that this information will be enhanced. This theory, this dual coding theory, is something that I thought about throughout the revision of this unit. It's something that is consistent in every single lesson, the idea of providing information and providing visuals with that information. So this is what the revised unit looks like. Again, what I did in 2011 was a PowerPoint. I've turned it into a Prezi, which is, of course, a lot more motion, a lot more visually appealing. It's definitely more work, but I do think that this is going to be something that my students really will appreciate and can really use. So here are the essential questions. Every single lesson is based off these 6 essential questions. Everything I do, in theory, should relate back to these questions here. And again, that's just establishing objectives, and we'll look at those throughout the day. This is a quote from Berlin. Pictures that provide a certain level of uncertainty can influence arousal and exploratory behavior. To get into the unit, I wanted to introduce 6 pictures that can produce uncertainty. When looking at these 6 images, and I'll quickly run through them here, the students might think they understand what's going on, but there's also should have a level of uncertainty, and the idea is just to pique their interest using these visuals and kind of play on some misconceptions, play on some bias, and it's a nice way to introduce us to introduce the students to the unit and some of the concepts that we'll be discussing. For instance, this image here, what I will do is I'll have the students simply write down the story that is being told by the photo. And what my guess is many students will say that this is a image of a Nazi rally in Germany, or the focus will be on Europe, when in fact this is actually a Nazi rally being held in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm only going to focus on 2. This gruesome and extremely graphic picture. When students look at this, they immediately might go to the Holocaust. This is actually a picture of the aftermath and devastation of Nagasaki after the United States decided to drop the bomb on Japan and essentially end the war. So for each day, this is what it looks like. A nice little overview, and then usually for most days where we're actually going to be doing a chapter reading or a light chapter overview, I like to give the vocabulary. For the vocabulary, I also like to provide images, and here's an image of Rommel, the sand fox, and here is an image of Churchill, who was actually not throwing up the peace sign, he's holding up the V for victory. Usually following this, it's always nice to throw in a little video, and let's see if this will play here. It doesn't look like it, but this is a scene from the made-for-television movie Into the Storm, which is about Winston Churchill, and this is the scene where Churchill writes one of his most famous speeches after the British have been forced to evacuate Dunkirk. The Nazis are preparing to invade the British island, and Churchill uses his mastery of the English language to rile up the people of Britain. Again, day 2, the overview, the vocab, and some images concerning, there's MacArthur. This is what Pearl Harbor looked like. It's at this time where I'll get into the Google Earth tour. And this is what it looks like. I'm going to be very brief here. But, we'll start in Pearl Harbor, and Google Earth allows you to make tours, record them, and simply play them back. And it's really an amazing piece of technology that I use in my world history classes and in my geography classes. And I'll see if I can't just kind of hop forward here to the middle. So for instance, right here we're looking at the Coral Sea, the Battle of the Coral Sea. Kids can get an idea about how close, the fighting in the Pacific was to the country of Australia and the country of Japan. Here we go to there it is, the tiny island of Midway. There was a battle here. Fought for an airstrip, and you can see the airstrip actually as we zoom out. A lot of the fighting in Japan was over islands like this, and it was for airstrip and ultimately air supremacy. So the idea is to kind of get an idea of what these islands actually look like and kind of the vastness of the Pacific, which I focus on a little more in my paper. Day 3 is when we get into the Pacific. This is another new revision. I'll be showing the episode titled Guadalcanal, which will get into some jungle fighting. And really does an amazing job of showing just how miserable it was in the Pacific. Day 4, we move to Europe and focus on the Battle of the Bulge and the D-Day invasion. Vocabulary. Some images to correspond to the vocabulary. And just some images specifically for D-Day, map of Europe at the time. Some of the jump-off points, a breakdown of the beaches, and an image of what it looked like on that day. To the Battle of the Bulge, the next day in class we'll be watching an episode from Band of Brothers titled Bastogne, which is when the U.S. Airborne has to hold off the Germans as they make their final attempt to win the war. Again, that's day 5 there. Day 6, we will continue to review the essential questions throughout, but this is the day we'll look at a lot of propaganda. And here we'll talk a lot about the use of color, the use of imagery, the use of symbolism. We'll break down some very, very specific visual elements of each of these. Bamford does a great job of providing some questions to be answered for persuasive images, which we will use during this as well. Day 7, we'll actually be looking at political cartoons. They are not uploaded onto the Prezi, but they cover a lot of different, parts of the war, from the Lend-Lease Act to Pearl Harbor, etc. Day 8 is when we will address the Holocaust. We'll be reading some primary sources from the Bermuda Refuge Conference, and this was kind of the first time people started to say something needs to happen. Go back here. Also that day we will watch a scene from Band of Brothers where it shows the liberation of a Nazi death camp. Day 9 is a Nuremberg trial simulation. Not a lot of visuals that day. Day 10, we will talk about Victory in Japan Day. We will focus on a little bit on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. We'll also focus on the victory in Europe, and we will read a letter from a mother to a son who explains what New York is like after Truman declares victory in Europe, and we'll again associate now that letter with this image here, and this is of a man supposedly grabbing a random woman, this sailor here in Times Square, and we'll can try to make the connection about what people were really feeling after the war finally ended, and just some discussion questions to go along with that. Day 11 will more primary sources as we talk about the atomic bomb. There's a letter from Einstein to FDR that we'll read talking about the importance of keeping that technology in American hands. And then we'll look at what the bomb really was and what it really did. And here's, you can see the devastation of Nagasaki, and we'll really break down this political cartoon here. And we'll talk about, the responsibility that comes with, obtaining and having atomic power. Day 12, again, all revisions. We'll talk about the aftermath. We'll use some statistics to kind of wrap everything up, and we'll end with a 12-minute crash course video, which is done by John Green. He does a lot of amazing little historical shorts, which are highly visual, and I'll play you some of that. After the war, I really do always want to focus on this. The Allies, who are seen as the good guys, are still in control of a lot of foreign lands, and that'll play a role in future units, so I kind of wanted to address that at the time. Some statistics concerning civilian and military deaths in World War II. And here is the crash course. I'm going to kind of rewind it a little bit and you can get an idea.
I'm not even going to acknowledge your existence.
Let's go back there, sorry.
Right, so you probably heard a lot about World War II from movies and books, the History Channel before it decided that swamp people were history, the incessant droning of your grandparents, etc. We're not going to try to give you a detailed synopsis of the war today. Instead, we're going to try to give a bit of perspective on how the most destructive war in human history happened and why it still matters globally. So one of the reasons history classes tend to be really into wars is that they're easy to put on tests. They start on one day and they end on another day, and they're caused by social, political, and economic conditions that can be examined in a multiple choice kind of manner, except not really. Like, when did World War II start? In September 1939, when the Nazis invaded Poland? I'd say no. It actually started when Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, or at the very latest, when the Japanese invaded China in 1937, because they didn't stop fighting until 1945. Then again, you could also argue 1933, when Hitler took power, or 1941, when America started fighting. It's complicated. But anyway, in China, the fighting was very brutal, as exemplified by the infamous rape of Nanking, which featured the slaughter of hundreds and thousands of Chinese people. And
So as you can see, very visual, and he does move very fast through the material, but it's really good video, and the kids are pretty familiar with it. They always get excited when that theme music comes on. And day 13 is the test. Thank you for your time, and hope you enjoyed some of my revisions to my World War II unit, and thanks.